It was supposed to be the happiest night of their lives, a night drenched in luxury, love, and a future worth billions. But just 1 hour after sealing his fate with a kiss, the Arab millionaire lay lifeless on the marble floor of his own wedding venue. The music stopped, the guests froze, champagne glasses slipped from trembling hands. But the real shock, it wasn't his sudden, mysterious death. It was his bride's reaction, because instead of collapsing in grief, instead of screaming his name in agony, she did something no one could have predicted. And trust me, when I say no one, I mean no one. Now, was it heartbreak? Or was it something much, much darker? Because in this world of private jets, diamond-studded gowns, and love stories with way too many zeros attached, not every "I do" means forever. Some vows come with a price, a deadly one. And if you think this was just a tragic accident, oh, you have no idea what's coming next. Before we dive into the bride's chilling reaction, let's talk about the man who made this whole story possible, the Arab millionaire himself. A man so powerful, so ridiculously wealthy, that his morning coffee probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He wasn't just rich, he was untouchable. Or at least, that's what he thought. His empire stretched across continents, his name was whispered in boardrooms, and when he walked into a room, the air got heavier because money, real money, has weight. And this man? Oh, he carried it well. But for all his success, there was one thing money couldn't buy: love. Or could it? Because when he introduced his stunning young fiancée to the world, people had questions. Was she his soulmate, his queen, or just another beautiful accessory in his collection of expensive things? See, powerful men like him don't just fall in love, they negotiate, they calculate, and some would say they make deals. But was this deal his last? Because behind closed doors, even the richest man in the world is just a man, and on his wedding night, in the arms of his brand new bride, he had no idea he had less than an hour left to live. Now let's talk about her, the bride, the woman who walked down the aisle draped in a gown so expensive it could have bought an entire penthouse in Dubai, the woman who smiled sweetly, kissed her new husband, and just 1 hour later stood over his lifeless body. But here's the real question: who was she, really? Because behind that perfect face, behind those hypnotic eyes, there was something no one could quite figure out. Some say she was a mystery, others say she was a fantasy, but everyone agreed on one thing: she was dangerous. The whispers started long before the wedding. Where did she even come from? Why did he marry her so fast? And why, despite all that wealth, all that power, did a man like him look afraid? See, love in the world of the ultra-rich isn't just about romance. It's about strategy. And this bride, oh, she played the game well. Too well. Was she the love of his life? Or just a woman who knew exactly what she was doing? Because let's be honest, when a man worth hundreds of millions marries a woman half his age, it's either a fairy tale or a ticking time bomb. And in just 1 hour, that bomb was about to go off. And then the night arrived, the wedding of the year. No, scratch that. The wedding of the decade. A celebration so grand, so drenched in wealth, that even the air inside the venue felt expensive. We're talking gold-trimmed invitations hand-delivered by private couriers, a venue booked out for an entire week just to ensure the floors were polished to perfection, and floral arrangements so massive they looked like they belonged in a royal palace. This wasn't just a wedding, this was a spectacle. Every seat in that ballroom was filled with the elite of the elite. Billionaires, oil tycoons, celebrities, princes, every guest more powerful than the next. Every conversation whispered like a secret deal being made. But among the glittering chandeliers and flowing champagne, there was an undercurrent, a tension no one could quite explain. Some of the guests noticed it first, the way the groom held his bride's hand just a little too tightly, the way his eyes darted around the room like he was expecting something or someone to appear. And the bride? She was the definition of perfection. Every hair in place, her diamond necklace reflecting the light in dazzling flashes, But there was something about her smile, not quite forced, not quite fake. But something. Then came the speech. Oh, the speech. When the Arab millionaire took the microphone, the room hushed. This was his moment, the powerful, wealthy, untouchable man welcoming the world to his happily ever after. But what he said next, that's where things got weird. He raised his glass, looked straight at his new bride, and said, "To new beginnings, and to finally knowing who you can trust." The guests exchanged glances. Some chuckled awkwardly. But one thing was clear. This was not the speech of a man simply basking in the glow of love. No, but this was the speech of a man sending a message, a warning, a confession, or a final goodbye. And then, just 1 hour later, the man who had everything lay lifeless on the cold marble floor. It happened so fast, too fast. 1 second, the music was playing, the guests were laughing, the bride was locked in conversation with a mysterious-looking man at the edge of the dance floor. And then, a gasp, a hand clutching a chest, a collapse. At first, people thought it was a joke, a dramatic toast, a playful moment. But then came the sound that would haunt that ballroom forever, the sound of a body hitting the floor. Silence. Then, screams. The groom was down, motionless, his skin losing color at a terrifying speed. Someone shouted for a doctor. A team of professionals rushed forward, because of course at a wedding like this, there were doctors in attendance, but nothing helped. No pulse, no response, just cold, terrifying stillness. And in that moment, as the reality settled in, the guests looked at her. The bride. Her reaction. That's where everything took a turn no one saw coming. Because she didn't scream, she didn't cry, she didn't even move at first. Instead, she just stood there, watching, unblinking, like she had already known this was going to happen. And then she did something that sent chills through every person in that room. Something that people would talk about for years. Because instead of breaking down in grief, instead of throwing herself over his body in agony, she smiled. Just for a second, just a flicker. But someone saw it. Someone caught it. And from that moment on, nothing was the same. You'd think a woman who just lost her husband 1 hour after their wedding would be inconsolable, collapsing into sobs, screaming his name, shaking his body as if she could somehow bring him back. But no, not this bride. Oh, she played the part for a while. She gasped at the right moment. She clutched her pearls, she allowed a few tears to slip down her flawless cheeks. But to the people watching closely, to the ones who knew how to read between the lines, something was off. For starters, she didn't touch him, not once, not even to cradle his head or hold his hand, not even in the way someone might instinctively reach out to a loved one in distress. It was as if she was watching a performance, a play where she already knew the ending. And then there was the smile. A moment so brief, so subtle, that if you blinked, you would have missed it. But someone didn't blink. Someone saw. Was it relief? Satisfaction? Or something far, far more sinister? And then came the whispers. She's not crying enough. She's too calm. She knew this was going to happen. But just as fast as the whispers started, the cover-up began. The security team moved in, ushering guests away. A PR team, yes, a PR team, was already making calls. The doctors ruled it a heart attack. The media was given an official story. And the bride? She disappeared. Not literally. No, she was still there, still draped in her wedding gown. But something about the way she carried herself. It was like she was already moving on. No desperate demands for an investigation, no questions about what really happened, and definitely no interest in staying by her husband's side any longer than necessary. And then came the final chilling detail. While the guests were still in shock, while the doctors were still hovering over the lifeless groom, she made a phone call, a private call, and when someone overheard one sentence from that call, it changed everything. Because the words that left her lips weren't words of sorrow. They weren't words of confusion or panic. Number the bride, the newlywed widow, simply said this. It's done. And that's when the real story began. A billionaire drops dead just 1 hour after saying I do. You really think people would just accept that? Oh no, my friend. This wasn't some tragic accident that would be mourned and forgotten. This was a scandal, a conspiracy, a story dripping with secrets, lies, and maybe even murder. At first, the official report was simple: a heart attack, the stress of the wedding, the emotions of the night, just an unfortunate tragedy. But there was a problem, a big problem. Billionaires don't just drop dead out of nowhere, not men like him. He had the best doctors, the best health checkups, the best everything money could buy. And more importantly, he knew something was off before the wedding even started. See, people started digging, investigators, journalists, even some of his own family members. They wanted answers. And when they started looking into what happened that night, they found details that didn't quite add up. First, the security footage. Cameras caught everything, right? Well, not this time, because somehow there were gaps, blackouts, convenient technical failures at exactly the wrong moments. The moment he took his last sip of champagne, gone.
The moment the bride whispered something into his ear just minutes before he collapsed, deleted. The moment she made that private phone call right after his death, never recorded. Coincidence? Please, not a chance. Second, the autopsy. Now this was where things got interesting, because while the official report said heart attack, there were discrepancies. His medical history showed 0 previous heart issues, no warning signs, no symptoms, nothing that would suggest he just suddenly dropped dead. And then a whistleblower, someone from inside the hospital, slipped a little extra detail to the press. Traces of poison. Not the obvious kind. Not something easy to detect. No, this was something sophisticated, something that mimicked natural causes, something that only a professional would know how to use. And suddenly this wasn't just a tragedy anymore. This was a crime. And now the real question, who did it? Because let's be honest, this wasn't just some random freak accident. Someone wanted him dead. Someone planned this. And the list of suspects? Oh, it was long. Was it the bride? Of course, she was the obvious suspect. The way she reacted, the missing footage, that chilling phone call where she whispered, "It's done?" Oh, the evidence was stacking up against her fast. And then came the money. Oh, you thought she walked away with nothing? Think again. Because just days before the wedding, the groom made one last adjustment to his financials. A mysterious transfer of assets. A new offshore account. And would you believe it? Her name was all over it. Millions. Maybe even billions. The moment he died, she became one of the richest women in the world. Coincidence? Again, not a chance. But wait, what if it wasn't her? What if the real killer was someone else? Because as it turns out, the groom had a lot of enemies. Business rivals. People he had crushed, betrayed, outplayed. People who would do anything to see him fall. His own family. Because believe it or not, this wasn't a simple love story gone wrong. There were inheritance wars brewing long before this wedding ever happened. And some of his relatives? Let's just say they weren't exactly devastated to see him go. Or what if it was someone in the room that night? Someone who wasn't supposed to be there. Because, surprise, a certain mysterious guest wasn't on the official invite list. Someone who had a history with the groom. Someone who was seen whispering to the bride just minutes before his death. And then, one final twist. A leaked voicemail. A message from the groom himself recorded the night before his wedding. His voice? Shaky, nervous. Unlike anything people had heard before. And his words? Oh, they would haunt people forever. If something happens to me after tonight, don't believe the official story. And just like that, the fairy tale wedding became the most infamous scandal in history. But what happened to her? Oh, don't worry, she didn't disappear. No, she played the game better than anyone. She went through the motions, wore black to the funeral, shed the right amount of tears, spoke of love and loss in interviews, And when the cameras were on, she was the perfect grieving widow. But when the cameras were off, she was untouchable. No charges, no arrests, no consequences. Because by the time the world pieced together the truth, she had already moved on. New city, new life. And would you believe it? A new man. A man just as rich, just as powerful, and just as blind to what she really was. Because if there's one thing about people like her, they don't stop. They don't settle. They don't get caught. And the real kicker? The last words she was ever heard saying before she left the country? I told him not to fall in love with me. Now tell me, was this just another tragic love story? Or was it the perfect crime? Because in a world where money rules everything and love is just another high-stakes gamble, some people never lose. Some fairy tales end with happily ever after. But the best ones? They end with a body count.